Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. We are gathered after a good session yesterday, building up some observation processes for models, which concludes the discussion of that mini module. Today, we're going to be going on to a broader topic, one which has been hinted at in a number of past lectures, in past example models, and one which is likely to play a role in some of the coming lectures as well. It has to do with hybrid modeling, hybrid dynamic modeling. So hybridization of agent-based modeling on the one hand, the focal technique for this course, with other system science approaches, other dynamic modeling approaches. This is a topic which has interested me at a serious professional level and where I've devoted significant time over the past quarter century. But the technologies for making it possible have evolved greatly during that time, to the point where a growing number of frameworks makes this hybridization of multiple techniques with agent-based modeling readily possible. At a broader philosophical level, what we're going to be speaking about today relates to the issue of metalinguistic abstraction. That's a fancy term for a simple idea. The idea that the language we use, formalisms we use in modeling, different types of modeling, shape what can be expressed concisely, expressively, flexibly, modularly, and in a transparent fashion. And that by picking our languages, the language we use carefully, by choosing the right language that gives us the right toolbox for different areas of our model or different areas of our modeling scope, we can more naturally and more efficiently and effectively carry out modeling of those domains. But more than that, it has to do with the fact that modeling, as I've emphasized from day one, is learning. Modeling is not a matter of using a crystal ball to predict the future, but rather using computational tools to help test and debug our thinking. The model I argued then from this floor, actually from the one over there, since we're in a different classroom, is not the truth, but it helps us test our thinking against the crucible of consistency and evidence from the world that more quickly finds problems in our thinking. So it's not the truth, but it helps speed us towards the truth. And I quoted Francis Bacon, I believe, on that first day, that one sooner arrives at truth from error than from confusion. It is by failing early, failing often, trying some understanding, testing it, evaluating it honestly, that we debug that thinking, that we find the error in our thinking, and we help root it out, and we come to a more refined set of thinking. And we continue to refine, of course. And that's better than just sitting back and saying, well, I really don't know. I really don't know what, how to approach it. I'm not sure, so I'm not going to take any stance. That may sound less fraught. That may sound less likely to yield a problem, but it's abdicating the opportunity to actively learn. And models are tools of active, not passive learning when used to good effect. And because of this, our understanding of our modeling needs, of the priorities for our model to address the research questions or the challenges, the problem, the decision-making needs, the understanding needs, evolve. We address some of those needs partially. We learn more about others. We prioritize some because they prove very important. We learn through modeling. We're refining our understanding, and it refines our sense of needed scope and how much detail we need for the model. And the key about hybrid modeling is about this pluralistic mixing of modeling approaches is that we can shift the boundary between different modeling approaches as we learn about the world, as we learn about modeling needs. Metalinguistic abstraction, choosing the right language and the right set of associated formalisms to describe different areas of the system comes to our aid because we can change that boundary more nimbly if we can weave together multiple languages in the same model. We can change where the boundary is between them, what we choose to express in the language of agent-based modeling, what we choose to express in the language of stock and flow modeling, or indeed discrete event simulation. So those are core ideas, and I'd like to expand on these as the time is afforded us. With those preliminary comments, I'm going to open up these slides. They are posted to the LMSs, and there'll be a set of models, which I posted along with these, for us to open in the course of today's session. So when I started my deeper investigations into hybrid modeling and its potential, the ideas that I'm going to present in this lecture were contentious. There was a bit of a winner-take-all philosophy, a sense that we had competing modeling methods, competing for system science dominance, with hopes among some that theirs would be the ascendant one, that it would replace or render outdated some of the others, or the others. That they had the most flexible one, they had the most powerful one, they had the most insightful one, they had the most scalable one, they had the most transparent one, what have you. I argued then, as I do now, wearing an older man's shoes, that these methodologies are highly complementary. The languages we use to describe them use different formalisms, but their difference is not foundationally in the formalism. Often the deepest difference is in the questions they ask, the types of challenges they're used to address. And no one system science method, not agent-based modeling, not stock and flow modeling, not discrete event modeling, is a replacement for the other. They have different fits to different needs. My colleague Jeff McDonald likes to talk about horses for courses. Use the right horse for the right horse. And I argued then, as I do now, as a computer scientist, that just as we build large-scale software systems from a polyglot of languages. In a given system, we may have represented, we may use Kotlin on the iOS side for mobile apps. We may use Swift on the Android side. We may use React with JavaScript on the server side, and excuse me, on the server on the client side of a browser interface. We may use Node.js and JavaScript again with TypeScript, say for type safety on the server side. We may use SQL for queries. We may use domain-specific configuration languages for certain needs and certain NoSQL syntaxes. We may use YAML to describe build pipelines. This is routine in software engineering. We build our systems out of different languages. And I argued that we benefit from the same with modeling. We secure many advantages from this. Comparative advantage, certain areas of our system may have features like the presence of needed resources and structured workflows that recommend it to discrete event simulation, the need to represent heterogeneity and networks and mobility and history dependence that recommend it to agent-based characterization, the need to represent variability in continuous states and feedback loops and their drivers, to reason about long-term behavior that recommend it to stock and flow modeling. Often it's easier to represent certain dynamics or certain features of the situation in one framework or another. We can have different analysis needs across models. The types of questions we ask. We may ask about throughput or latency in the system, natural questions in discrete event simulation. How much resources do we need? Where should they be placed? Again, very well suited to discrete event simulation. Questions involving inter-agent interaction, much more nicely characterized and reasoned about in agent-based modeling, et cetera, et cetera. I had noted this capacity to change the boundary, what we model with what language as modeling deepens. This is a reality that we've explored in many of our projects. And we've used many projects, probably 1 to 2 dozen really serious ones published, for most of those, certainly over a dozen, I'd say, published works that derive really strong benefit from hybrid modeling. Stakeholders sometimes resonate more. Stakeholders in certain areas, clinical physicians in some areas, demographers in other areas, may be spoken to by certain modeling methodologies. Undeniably, in some areas of our model, there may be a need for computational efficiency, particularly if we're talking about representing larger populations, and certain techniques, aggregate, stock and flow modeling may be appropriate there. And the need to represent multi-scale modeling. Characteristics, say, of immune system dynamics within a person, themselves embedded in different types of social networks and neighborhood and spatial environments and geographically, and engaging in care seeking in clinics with structured workflows. These are needs that motivate multi-scale modeling. So here, we're going to be focused on agent-based modeling and its interfacing with different techniques. Interfacing with discrete event simulation, a technique we'll be discussing in greater detail in coming lectures, is very natural due to a common individual level perspective. Discrete event simulation is another individual level approach to modeling, one that focuses on structured workflows where progress of defined set of entities that need to be operated upon, their progress along the workflow is limited by availability of resources. It's an individual level perspective for those entities and for the resources that operate upon them. ABM and SD both have great generality in frameworks that allow them to handle a wide range of issues well beyond structured workflows. So I want to talk here about 5 compelling health modeling patterns. These are patterns that come up again and again in health modeling. And we see them again and again in our published work, in our projects. We'll go through each. They involve rather distinct, rather orthogonal, different types of challenges or opportunities, depending on how these are phrased, within the modeling framework. And we'll go through them in turn. The first is what I'll characterize as service population interaction. And for each of these, I've provided with some example models. In one case, multiple. So I'd like you to go open up. You can find it on your LMS, this multi-clinic SAS hybrid saturation effects and lock-in. I'm not sure that I will need to, but I'll just note that you should find these down at the bottom of the set of example models for examination in class. We've gone through a bunch, and these are the lower ones down on it. So this multi-clinic SIS hybrid saturation effects and lock-in is the one of which I speak. And it's similarly located over in the context of the course Canvas site. Okay, so pardon me, I'm just going to go over and start up my AnyLogic, and I'll load it in alongside you. The strictures of time make it infeasible, render it infeasible for me to go through each of these in detail. But I'm going to highlight some simple features of them that bring out certain elements and this multi-clinic SAS hybrid saturation effects and login. Here we go. Let's open it up. Now, this is a model which has some structure that you'll recognize, some structure involving infection, but also structure involving care seeking. And it's notable that someone's infection status, they have 3 possible infection status where they're susceptible, they're exposed, they're infected but not infective, and often asymptomatic, and then there's infective and symptomatic. And in this state, they can spread the infection to others. What's notable is that they can be in a state of, so this other state chart, care-seeking state chart, as its name suggests, it characterizes individuals' attitudes and status with respect to care-seeking. And what we see here is that individuals start non-seeking care. That's why they fall in there. And then they can transition to start seeking care at the nearest clinic under a certain circumstance, namely if they're in the infective and symptomatic state of this state chart. And they do so with a chance of 75% per day. Here. Yes. Okay. Okay. So here, there's a coupling between this state chart and this one with respect to seeking care. Now, what's notable is that in seeking care, they move to a clinic, and having arrived at the clinic, they will enroll themselves in the clinic. Let's go see how that clinic is represented. Well, the clinic is represented in the language of and using the logical formalisms of discrete event simulation. You haven't had these explained to you yet. I will have 1 or 2 lectures coming up soon to explicate these. But these involve blocks here, individuals, entities, here are agents, flow in, and they progress down this structured workflow in ways that are limited by availability of resources and by the need to wait in queues when those resources are not available. The resources here are healthcare workers. Those healthcare workers are needed to confer treatment to these entities, but there's only so many of them. Initially, by default, there's a single healthcare worker, I believe, for most of these scenarios. Single healthcare worker per clinic. Here, the treatment takes a certain amount of time, certain number of hours, and people coming in need to queue up and wait. But if they wait too long, they will leave without being seen. That's what this upper transition indicates. If they are seen, they'll proceed down, they'll receive treatment, and then they'll have a chance of having that treatment yield success or failure, according to a certain probability. And then they will depart, and upon departure, they will go and be sent a message that will tell them over here, go back to it's this message, departed clinic, by which they will go back to their non-care seeking state. It's notable that that message will be sent regardless of whether they were treated successfully or not. They're not aware worked, but they go home as a result. Well, they do go home, but more to the point, they're no longer in a care-seeking state, and they may still infect others if they haven't been cured. If treatment is successful, we'll see where that's conferred. If treatment is successful, so you'll see there's this probability of success. If it is successful, they'll be sent a message called cured, word only so simple in the world. Cured will drive them from this state to this state. It'll bring them back from the infective state to the susceptible state. So they will depart regardless of whether they've been cured. Some will depart having been cured. Some will depart without having been cured and remaining unknowingly infected. Mm-hmm. So if we run this model, we've gotten the essentials of it. If we run this model, what we will see is a clinic, a set of homes. We will speed the model up, and sometimes the infection is nipped in the bud, and it does not spread sufficiently to stay established. It appears that that's the case here, and it's died out. It appears. So it seems. It seems there's 0 infective individuals. Let's run that again. So we have 3 individuals starting infective, or starting exposed. And now we see it continuing for a while at sort of a low level. And the point is that this clinic is engaged in treatment. So here's the clinic, and you can see that it's successfully, or it's brought in 300 people for treatment, 2,600, 2,700 have been successfully treated, 160 not so much. But now suddenly the situation has changed. Suddenly, most people are leaving. Only a comparatively small fraction are still being treated. The infection has gone ballistic. It's now spread to a very high prevalence level. A very large fraction of people overall are infected, and we therefore have over 1,200 agents, about 1,100 are infected, and it's spread. The clinic here is driven by the situation in the population, right? The people get infected in the population, and they seek care at the clinic. We saw the evidence of that. So the situation in the clinic, who shows up, how many people are waiting, are in large part driven by what's going on in the population. What's going on in the population, however, is in turn driven by what's going on in the clinic. The successful delivery of care affects how many people stay circulating with infection. The fact that people are waiting too long in the clinic and bulk and leave without being seen, that's this upper one, which is the bulk of people now, the large majority, that is a function of what's going on in the clinic, the availability of care workers. And by appropriately resourcing the clinic, for example, adding individuals to the clinic or adding clinics here to the model that could be visited by others. Now we have 3 clinics. Now we have 4 clinics. We affect the evolution of the population. Notably, for those interested in systems effects, 4 clinics would be enough to prevent the infection from taking off in the beginning. But it's not nearly enough once it's established. Once you're just picking up the bag after the infection's established, it's not nearly enough to drive it out. We need more than 4. In fact, we need more than 5. And in fact, even 5 are not enough. Here's with 6. If we bring 7, though, to bear, then we can drive it down. 7 versus perhaps 2, maybe 3. Clinics will stop it. Here we have an interaction of a service delivery articulated with the language of discrete event simulation together with the spread of infection in the population. So here we can answer joint questions regarding service types, availability of resources, the placement of those resources, service quality and its impact on population-wide dynamics. Interventions in the population can be characterized for how they ripple through to service demand, service needs. It's far easier here compared to pure ABM to capture assumptions regarding service delivery. It's far easier here compared to pure discrete event simulation to capture interactions of individuals. This is interaction of service delivery with DES, discrete event simulation, and agent-based modeling. They fit together like a glove. Both are individual-based. They have different focuses of attention. Discrete event simulation with resource-limited workflows. Effective service delivery, the impact of service quality, impacts on throughput, impacts on latency, how long it takes one person to go through, the impact of resourcing and placement and amount, ABM for interactions, spatial context, locational context, nested context, agent-agent interaction with each with 8 other agents or with the environment, aspects of history, heterogeneity. Well, that's actually what heterogeneity is reasonably easy to examine in discrete event simulation. Very powerful combination. Let's now look at a rather different bringing together of two methods. We're going to look at a focal population and a broader aggregate population. Rather than having two methods integrated in a given model sort of laterally, horizontally, we're going to open a different sort of model. We're going to have a model where one deals with a much larger set of the population in a coarse-grained way, and then a smaller population in an agent-based fashion that's a population of focal interest. Many models we published of this sort, it affords efficiency while still being effective. It often allows us to take the really high-resolution agent-based lens and couple it with with dynamics of the broader population at a coarser level, keeping our eye on the ball of our focal population. We used this during the pandemic, and some of our models used for decision-making at the provincial level with service delivery within as an additional component as well. So we had a SD model, a stock and flow model, an agent population. In fact, we had service delivery as well. Let's go give an essential pointer to how that happens without it being a full model, but it cuts to the chase of the essentials of it. So I'd ask you to go download a model called Budding Hybrid SD-ABM model. Budding Hybrid SD-ABM model. Okay. Budding Hybrid ABM model. So, within this model, we're going to have an upstream stock of new diabetics and a downstream stock that is a temporary stock. The idea here is that we're going to have a broader population of people at risk of diabetes, And it would be very natural if we divide it into successive stocks at successively higher levels of risk. Maybe a general population, a at-risk population, and a high-risk population. But represented as aggregates. We're keeping track of people here as counts. We might further subscript these by demographics, by age groups, for example, tenure age groups, or perhaps immigration status, additionally, etc. But it's not until they reach a certain point, this point here, that they're going to turn into agents. They flow from the upstream stocks, and at some point, the flow turns them into individual agents. They are budded off into individual agents. And you can see here, we started with 1,000 people here. And already, there's 7 that have turned into agents. You can count them here, these 4 and these 3, right? As time goes on, more and more people flow down and they turn into agents. By virtue of flowing down this flow, being accumulated here to the point it turns into a complete agent, we get an agent. An agent is budded. It is brought into existence with the desired trait. Now, it's notable that in a model like this, often you have much more information you wish to maintain about these compared to those. The focal population may involve more details. So maybe here you only characterize individuals into tenure age groups and you give them an actual double precision age or birth date here. Or maybe they have a certain detailed health profile here that you don't have here. And sometimes those more detailed information are themselves reflections of the processes here. So maybe it's at this point of turning into an agent that they seek care in the health system, and there's a record, a history if there's care seeking. It starts at this juncture, and so all of it can be naturally captured. But some things, like age, might need to carry over from a very coarse-grained category, tenure age group, they're 50 to 59, to a very specific number. And we would draw that from an empirical distribution, for example, or use some joint distribution over factors here to characterize these individuals at a greater level. So often this kind of impedance mismatch, the fact that you have a coarser representation here, finer, leads to some finesse at this juncture. Some lending of greater detail that comes with the territory. But beyond that, there's often a great deal of information you can maintain about these that are affected by their subsequent evolution. Maybe, for example, for a communicable disease model, this occurs when they are in contact with an infective for the first time, for monkeypox or for COVID or what have you, and they are placed in this category of at-risk individuals who thereafter have a certain chance per unit time of getting infected based on, as agents, messages are being sent in their social networks, etc. And they go through life with all those extra details being computed because we turn them into agents at the time these risks present themselves. We put them in networks, etc. The key thing is we don't have to represent this population, this upstream population, which might be 95% of the province's population, or 90 90% of Canada's population or what have you. We don't need to represent it as individuals. We've turned people into individuals at the time that detail is needed, particularly at their level of risk progression that is needed. Perhaps it's based on age, right? Maybe we're dealing with risk of dementia, and we recognize that the risk of dementia accelerates beyond a certain point, and we turn them into agents once they reach a certain age. So many successful uses of this model, and some modeling colleagues in the UK, Sally Brailsford, for example, have made excellent use of this technique. Okay, I want to go on to a third compelling pattern. Again, very different. So here we're going to have system dynamics, stock and flow modeling, integrated with agents. Not as stock and flow modeling as we've been used to thinking about as aggregated characterization of the whole population, but stock and flow modeling within each agent, characterizing dynamics. We're going to go take a look at two models of this, one more briefly than the other. Here we go. So we're going to close this one, and I'd like you to open up CTL state variable, use any logic 7. I think for you folks, here it is, a CTL state variable hybrid stock and flow, and there's something comparable over on the U of S site. Look for a CTL state variable. Here we go. So CTL, for those not familiar with immunology, is cytotoxic T lymphocyte. It's a immune system actor that helps. It's part of cell-mediated immunity rather than innate immunity. It complements, and it's actually, so I understand it, more specific than what antibodies can fight. And it's a very potent line of defense, or points to a potent line of defense. So here, if we go and look at person, we see that person's situation is characterized in a state chart in a rather austere view of life, or stark view of life. They're either living or they're dead, but their death is dependent on their viral load. And their viral load is indicated that their state is not just this characterized discretely. It's not just characterized as this set of possibilities of living or dead. The evolution of their state is described as stocks and flows. But these flows are not flows of the whole population. No, they're flows within a person. And they characterize within a person the number of uninfected cells, say in the epithelial lining of the throat, infected cells. Infected cells undergo lysis and release free virions, free virus particles. And infected cells simulate immune response, and the immune response kills off these are the cytotoxic T lymphocytes. It kills off the infected cells, so they don't spread and release virions as badly. Now, what's notable here is that this is a regulatory process. There's kind of an outbreak of virions within a person. Cells get infected. They lead to more virions, which infects more cells. There's a positive feedback loop here. But it's the presence of those infected cells stimulates the growth of cytotoxic T lymphocytes, which then start to kill off those infected cells, and they bring it under control. But generally, the virus will spread first, and then your body will respond, and eventually bring it under control. Now, one thing that this model was designed to address was the fact that, look, when it comes to infections, we know that there's dramatic heterogeneity in terms of people's ability to handle infections. If you look at between elderly individuals or immunocompromised individuals on the one hand versus fully healthy individuals, younger, they often differ strongly in immune system strength. This ends up impacting many things. It ends up impacting the duration of infection, the severity of infection, the amount of time that it takes to clear the infection, the effectiveness of vaccines, not shown here, but something which could be integrated. It affects the likelihood of a person dying from infection. And in fact, how much their risk of spreading it to others. If they have a very high viral load, they might spread it more to others. And in fact, what we have here, and I chose not to describe it when I first characterized it, is that each virus load is built up through contact with neighbors. Okay, so there's some input into the viral load from other individuals. So this model, this simple little model, accounts for those differences in duration of infection and severity of infection and likelihood of dying, the virulence, because this viral load affects their likelihood of dying. So if they go above a certain viral load set by this parameter, they will pass away. So if we have a very high viral load threshold, in other words, the viral load has to reach very high levels, comparatively few people will pass away. Here we go. So this is some published work that we have done. So here we have individuals getting infected. I should note that the redness of the little balloon, this little balloon, the redness of it represents their viral load level. The radius of the balloon reflects the level of immune system activation response, the load of this sort of cytotoxic T lymphocyte stock, the size of that. And generally what you'll see is that things get red and then they get big, reflecting the fact that viral load goes up and the immune system follows, brings it under control, hence it fades and spreads. But you'll notice that it's spreading in the network. The fact that someone turned red means that they can now infect their neighbors, right? And it can spread to others through this pathogen from their neighbors. These are virions from their neighbors. This total viral load from neighbors goes over their neighbors in the network to bring in the amount of virus from their neighbors, and a certain fraction of it comes to them. Think people sharing needles, or think people engaged in intimate contact, or what have you. And so here we have infection spreading within a network dynamics bring under control, but the duration, the severity, the virulence, the chance of dying, and the likelihood of passing it on, or the amount that they pass on, is all shaped at a level of a person by these immune dynamics. And we can examine, as we change the levels of immune strength of a person, say this C parameter, this beta parameter, we can change their level of immune strength in different ways. So there we had it spreading. If there's a medium viral load threshold, what this will lead to is people within the population who have weaker immune systems tragically passing away. Okay. And that will end up affecting the network, because if those people pass it away, at the very, even if they go to the hospital, right, they'll be isolated from others. and won't be able to pass it on as readily. So the network will be broken, the connectivity of the network, and that will affect spread. Okay, I could describe this. You can find this in some of our descriptions from the literature. We'll turn now to a different model, also available to you on the course site. This model is the environmental contamination model. Okay. The environmental contamination model, I don't have time to go into this. We need to make further ground, but here we have persons, and the persons can get infected, but they can get infected with through one of two routes, one of two causal pathways, one of two generative pathways, through environmental infection or initial infection. Here, if infected, they shed and then they recover. They can be at work or they can be off from work. People have homes and people have workplaces, but both workplaces and homes have pathogen reservoirs that are built up. Reservoirs of virus or pathogen that has been deposited there. This is true of workplaces. This is also true of homes. And the buildup is based on shedded pathogen shedded by infected people. So how quickly virus is building up here is determined by how many infected people are at that location, at home or at the workplace. Pathogen dies off at a certain rate, and people move back and forth between home and these workplaces. And I apologize for the aesthetic affronts, but what you will see here, and we'll see if we can speed this up. We're only a few hours into the simulation here. Let's see if we can run it a little bit faster. Maybe I should have used a smaller population. Maybe I will stop it in the interest of time and run it with a medium small population. That sounds just like what I need. Okay. There we go. Okay, this is a bit more manageable, and what one sees. Okay, in my enthusiasm, I missed the key point, tipping point here. So what we're seeing here is hour by hour. We'll speed it up here a little bit more. We have people going to work, people going home, people going to work. And one thing you'll notice is this workplace has built up a certain amount of pathogen. We have, because multiple people work at the workplace, they've now brought it to their homes. The homes have started to build up, stop shedding. But it's actually being built up now at homes because there are infected people there. And this cycle will continue. With eventually those workplaces, such as this index workplace and home, being clear of infection. And had I presence of mind, I would have, and I'm really operating on borrowed time here, I would have gone and gone into a workplace, say, and we can see a pathogen reservoir. And by playing things forward at a more sedate speed, one thing I can see is the dynamics of the pathogen reservoir. Day by day, periods of shedding, building it up, periods of decay overnight, periods of shedding, periods of decay, building it up as people shed, and then as people recover from it, the workplace decreases. You could simulate many interventions here, work from home. You could simulate random testing or mass testing. You could simulate the effects of cleaning within these places, right? Monitoring sewage and undertaking more detailed testing at an individual level, at a level of a workplace, etc. But here we have stock and flow within agents operating. We are mixing stock and flow modeling on the one hand with agent-based modeling on the other, with stock and flow within agents. The final, we've again used that in many, the final one that I will just refer to is basic health economics model. Once again, you can find it within your course site, the LMS. It's basic health economics. Yeah. Here, we have agents at a lower level driving high-level stock and flow. You can imagine this applying to high-level quantities of water, of water availability, for example, within the landscape, right? Water use, availability of clean water, availability of polluted water that needs to be cleaned or what have you, availability of gray water. You can imagine this being climate-related stocks and emissions coming from agents, right? Agent behavior would affect water consumption, whether people are engaged in conserving or more profligate use. You can imagine companies and individuals who might contribute to emissions at a high level. You could imagine these high-level stocks relating to populations of mosquitoes. And we're characterizing malaria and its spread. And we don't simulate each mosquito individually, but we simulate individual people because we want to characterize care seeking. And the presence of malaria among people can lead to mosquitoes picking it up and becoming infected. So it could drive stocks. In this case, we have health economics measures. So within each person, we have some simple characterization of a progression of diabetes in a very stylized way. And each of these states characterizes some quality of life, health-related quality of life, say via a utility scale, using more specific scales or EQ5D or other instruments, and the cost per year as well for being in that state. Moreover, there are certain transitions here, such as a transplant transition, which impose costs in and of themselves. So many costs are accumulated just by being in a state. You have a cost per year induced an agent being in that state. They contribute that amount per year. But then there are certain transitions which are care-intensive transitions, like receiving a transplant, a graft, which impose a cost at that instant. Here, we actually directly accumulate in a manner that might make a traditional cystamine emesis, one bound to purely blush, because we actually increment the accumulated undiscounted costs here in a manner that is frank. Beyond that, your presence of being in certain states induces a flow in that come from health services. Costs per year. And what are the costs per year for the population? Well, the population costs per year are indeed reflected in their a sum up over that population, these new costs per year, of their costs per year. And for each person, we saw this last time, from this seat, not 25 hours thence. We went over an example of building a little statistic, right? That totaled things up across the population. We used count at that time. Here we're summing up the cost per year, summing them up across the population, cost per year. And for each of these states, the cost per year is set. So we're summing up across the population for each person in turn the costs that they impose on the care system. And those costs, those per year costs, drive this flow that flows into the stock. There are additionally intervention costs, which I won't go into, but are costs related to interventions that we launch. So maybe we have an aggressive prediabetes prevention intervention, and that will lower the chance of people developing, so this is prediabetes progression, it will lower the chance that they get to the state. Okay, so here. So it will affect this chance that they go back to normal glycemic state from prediabetes, but it will also impose some cost per year for screening on a per person basis. So per non-diabetic that is screened, or some cost imposed in achieving that. So maybe for motivational interviews and chronic disease management guidance, etc. $5,000 to make sure they're well equipped with supplies for, well, that would be for managing frank type 2 diabetes. Here, these are totaled up. Those flow in to this flow, which flows in across the entire population. It totals it up and it flows in here. The point is these stocks are in Maine. They are totaling up across the population, across all these people in the population, these costs. So here we have, standing before us, a model like this. We have high-level stocks and flows, and we have agents driving those. We have individual agents, many of them, 1,000 of them, progressing among different states, with each of those states imposing costs. In fact, you can see those costs characterized there. If I go down to person zero, I believe it was, person zero is $50,000 per year, and then person zero tragically passed away. So they passed away, and they're not imposing new costs per year, but they did quite high in their final states. So these people have quality of life 1, 0 cost per year in a normal glycemic state, but here they have a cost per year now of $1,000 per year while in this transplant state. So here, these are all contributing to the flow into these quantities, the number of quality adjusted life years accumulated in the population, the number of life years lived in the population, the undiscounted costs by a 3% discount rate. Here, we have people driving high-level stocks and flows. Those are all the models that I have time to show you today. I will note that there's one that I'm not going to show. It involves aggregate system dynamics driving agent evolution. This could be aggregate dynamics associated with infection levels among mosquitoes, so susceptible, infected, recovered mosquitoes for malaria or for West Nile or for dengue fever or for Zika or chikungunya or Eastern equine encephalitis, infecting agents. The agents are affected by these, or maybe these are stocks associated with levels of promotion of tobacco products or levels of promotion of vaping at some level within the population. Or perhaps they're polluted water, clean water, polluted water, heavily polluted water, or what have you. And the amount of water in relative amounts in these stocks ends up affecting the risk of agents developing waterborne illness, something along those lines. These two involve an interaction of aggregate quantities that we don't need to model at an individual level, water, amount of advertising, perhaps, levels of certain pollutants in the atmosphere, what have you, affecting individuals. We can follow those individuals. We can follow their care seeking. We can follow their progression. We can follow the development of their illnesses, and we can intervene upon them in ways that are targeted for them. I have shown you today 5 compelling patterns. 5 compelling patterns that bring together the power of agent-based modeling on the one hand with 2 other dynamic modeling traditions: discrete event modeling for service delivery, structured work, resource-limited structured workflow progression along resource-limited progression along structured workflows, and on the other side, stock and flow dynamics within an individual, within the overall environment, affecting that individual, being infected or affected by that individual or both. It is the capacity to weave these together that allow us to often build rich models that are at once able to be transparent, flexible, evolvable, expressive for characterizing the needs of our particular area, and able to have the resolution and the effectiveness at examining the impacts of certain interventions or explaining phenomena that we wish to explain from the world, or otherwise influencing or shaping our thinking. By virtue of having them in a single model, we can change the boundary. We can decide at what point of risk progression do individuals get budded into agents, right? We could characterize what level of the environment involving advertising for sugar-sweetened beverages requires GIS-specific placement of of billboards or online advertisements that we wish to represent as individual instances in an agent-based model versus representing it with stocks and flows. Sometimes that choice is easier than others. This gives us the chance to shift that boundary with our learning. It gives us a chance to use mechanisms well fit to each of these areas, judiciously chosen to address our understanding of the priorities of what we need to examine, but offering us the very real option of shifting that boundary so we can always use the method fit for need. We can keep the form of the model fit to its function. That's all we have time for today in the lecture. I hope that those have been educational. I will note that there's that link, as always, to that library of models. And I will just point out that the library of models has within it that same folder whence these models came. We have dozens of other agent-based models that are combined with hybrid modeling in many different areas. I would welcome you to go through that link on the website for the library of such models, and this one here, library of any logic ABMs and hybrid models. And you'll find them in the hybrid folder there. Thank you very much.